morning and welcome to Mission Control Houston. I'm NASA's Sandra Jones. You're looking at a live view from the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, Texas. We currently have live views of the Northrop Grumman Cygnus resupply cargo craft that will be departing from the International Space Station shortly after being docked to the space station since October 5th, 2020. This morning, we'll be targeting a release of Cygnus around 9:10 Central Time from the Canadarm2 of the International Space Station. Today's team in Mission Control is being led by Flight Director Pooja Jasani. She's joined on console by Capcom, or Capsule Communicator, Norishi Kanai. You'll hear calls from Kanai up to the crew on station, specifically to NASA astronaut Kate Rubins, as the ground steps through procedures to release Cygnus shortly. Today's VVO, or Visiting Vehicle Officer, is Tom Castleberry. They'll be communicating directly with the Northrop Grumman flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia. Leading the team in Dulles is Northrop Grumman Mission Director Zach Dwyer. Teams in Dulles are continuing to keep tabs on the vehicle and will take over full control once it passes out of the approach ellipsoid around the space station later today. The approach ellipsoid is an imaginary gate or fence around the station, measuring 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 2 kilometers. Once Cygnus departs this area, joint operations between Northrop Grumman and NASA will end, and Northrop Grumman will take over full control of the Cygnus spacecraft. Preparations for Cygnus undock began a couple of hours ago, around 7:25 a.m. Central Time, when flight controllers used the Canadarm2 to unbolt Cygnus from the Earth-facing side of the Unity module of the space station and maneuvered Cygnus to the release position it currently is in. Monitoring the release of the spacecraft from the space station today is NASA astronaut Kate Rubins. She'll be poised in position of the station's cupola and will have a great view of the spacecraft as it is undocked and makes its way away from the space station and back toward Earth, where it will harmlessly burn up in the Earth's atmosphere upon re-entry over the Pacific Ocean. You're currently looking at a view of Cygnus as it is docked to the International Space Station. But before Cygnus can re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, it will complete a series of milestones today. The first will be a departure burn lasting about 3 minutes. This burn will move the spacecraft safely away from the space station and toward the Keep-Out Sphere, which is a 200-meter radius around the space station. From there, Cygnus will continue moving away from the station and will make its way to the approach ellipsoid, which is that 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 2 kilometer invisible line or gate we discussed.
On 2.
Hey, Nemo, just wanted to let you know we're working 173.08.
These invisible lines are also where we have checkpoints when vehicles approach the space station, helping flight controllers monitor vehicles when they're in the vicinity of the orbiting laboratory.
That says to leave it there, so could not find the two JSL firewall power cables.
Copy. Missing 003 and 006 on item 173.08. Thank you.
It's a good readback, Nemo.
Following that departure burn, and once Cygnus is safely out of the neighborhood of the space station, this is the point at which joint operations will end. However, that will not yet be the end of Cygnus's mission. It will remain in orbit until January 26th, conducting several experiments before re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and harmlessly burning up over the Pacific Ocean. Each Cygnus spacecraft is named after a significant individual in human spaceflight. This vehicle is named after Kalpana Chawla, the first female astronaut of Indian descent. Chawla, who dedicated her life to understanding flight dynamics, died in the STS-107 Space Shuttle Columbia accident in 2003. The Cygnus vehicle that will be undocking today began its journey to the space station on October 2nd, 2020, when it launched from the Wallops Flight Facility in Wallops, Virginia, on top of an Antares rocket. Cygnus carried with it approximately 8,000 pounds of crew supplies, experiments, and hardware. And Cygnus arrived to its capture point 3 days later, on October 5th, with NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy at the controls of the Canadarm2 robotic arm for capture. A few hours after its successful capture, Cygnus completed installation when it was installed to the Earth-facing side of the Unity module of the International Space Station, where it has remained since this morning when it was moved into the release position discussed earlier.
And Dragon Station on 2 for cargo, or Houston Station on 2 for Dragon cargo ops.
Go ahead for cargo ops.
And Nemo, the next item as well, 173.09, not found.
Copy. We are checking. Thank you for the report.
Yep, the only two located at Lab 1, Deck 1 are serial numbers 7 and 10, and those look like they're both operating.
Copy all. Thank you.
Everything's still proceeding nominally on the ground as we move towards Cygnus release shortly. Release still scheduled for 9:10 Central Time.
Station Houston 2 for Hopper. We will get back to you after Cygnus release. About 15 minutes or so.
Yep, I copy. That sounds good. Thanks.
As we discussed earlier, today's release of Cygnus will be triggered by teams on the ground rather than the crew aboard the space station. Once that command is sent, the snares on the robotic arm's end effector, which is essentially the hands of the robotic arm, will open and we'll begin to see separation of the vehicle. The spacecraft will slowly drift away as it begins its departure burn, and flight controllers here will begin retracting the arm. This view of Cygnus attached to the station's robotic arm is coming to you live from the International Space Station, which is currently 263 statute miles over the North Pacific Ocean. If you're just tuning in with us today, we'll be targeting a release of Cygnus around 9:10 Central Time from the Canadarm2 of the International Space Station. Preparations for Cygnus undock began a couple of hours ago around 7:25 a.m. Central Time when flight controllers used the Canadarm2 to unbolt Cygnus from the Earth-facing side of the Unity module on the space station. They then maneuvered Cygnus to the release position it's currently in. Monitoring the release of the spacecraft today from the space station is NASA astronaut Kate Rubins. She'll be poised in position of the station's cupola and will have a great view of the spacecraft as it is undocked and makes its way away from the space station and back toward Earth, where it will harmlessly burn up in the Earth's atmosphere upon re-entry over the Pacific Ocean.
For Kate regarding Cygnus release.
Yeah, on two.
Thank you for waiting. Now, go for Cygnus configuration checks. Perform step 2 in 1.602.
Copy. Step 2 and VV mode is in free drift. Cygnus lights are visible. Cygnus command path is on, ON. PCS, Cygnus command panel LED configuration is as expected. And Cygnus command...
Everything's still proceeding nominally for an on-time undocking of Cygnus from the space station. Undocking currently scheduled for just 10 minutes from now at 9:10 Central Time. After Cygnus successfully undocks from onboard station, flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia will initiate deorbit burns to allow Cygnus to burn up harmlessly in the Earth's atmosphere on January 26th, disposing of over 4,000 pounds of trash during its fiery re-entry over the Pacific Ocean.
Houston on 2 for airlock on stow.
Go ahead on 2.
Yeah, Nemo, working on unpacking 4.0 CTV number 5039, and it looks like the stow track information was only thinking there was one item in there. There is actually a foam box in here that holds some of the spools from the fiber optic payload. The fiber spool, serial numbers 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know where this foam box is supposed to go or be.
Okay, Shannon, thank you for the report. We will get back to you.
That was the voice of NASA astronaut Kate Rubins, currently aboard the space station, who will be monitoring today's release of Cygnus.
Station Houston on Space Ground 2 for Kate regarding Cygnus release ops.
On 2.
You go ahead and perform step 3 and 4 in 1.602 Cygnus release and departure monitoring.
We go for step 3 and 4 in Cygnus departure release monitoring, and I'm waiting for your notification for release commanded.
Sounds good.
Everything still proceeding nominally as we target a 9:10 Central Time release of Cygnus from the Canadarm2 aboard the International Space Station. We're currently in a brief expected handover between satellites, and we will regain communications shortly. If you're just tuning in with us, we'll be targeting a release of Cygnus around 9:10 Central Time from the Canadarm2 of the International Space Station. Preparations for Cygnus undock began a couple of hours ago around 7:25 a.m. Central Time when flight controllers used the Canadarm to unbolt Cygnus from the Earth-facing side of the Unity module of the space station and maneuvered Cygnus to the release position it currently is in. Monitoring the release of the spacecraft today from the space station is NASA astronaut Kate Rubins. She'll be poised in position of the station's cupola and will have a great view of the spacecraft as it is undocked and makes its way away from the space station and back toward Earth, where it will harmlessly burn up in the Earth's atmosphere upon re-entry over the Pacific Ocean. But before Cygnus can re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, it will complete a series of milestones. The first will be a departure burn lasting about 3 minutes. This burn will move the spacecraft safely away from the space station and toward the keep-out sphere. The keep-out sphere is a 200-meter radius around the space station. From there, Cygnus will continue moving away from the station and will make its way to the approach ellipsoid, which is a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 2 kilometer invisible line around the station. At this point, joint operations between NASA and Northrop Grumman will end. However, that will not yet be the end of Cygnus's mission. It will remain in orbit until January 26th, conducting several experiments before re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and harmlessly burning up over the Pacific Ocean. We're just 2 minutes away from the scheduled release of Cygnus today from the International Space Station. That release scheduled for 9:10 Central Time.
Station Houston on 2 for Kate. ISS thruster inhibited and ground M1 is go for release on time.
Copy on Station Ground 2. Ground is go for release on time. ISS thruster inhibited. ISS and crew are ready for release. Go from ISS.
Houston copies.
And we just heard confirmation that everything is go for Cygnus to release on time at 9:10 Central Time. That release coming in just under a minute.
Station Houston on 2, proceeding with release.
Copy.
Release commanded.
Copy.
And we just heard confirmation that the release of Cygnus has been commanded. Those latches are now in motion, preparing to release the vehicle.
Snares open. Begin monitoring for drift out.
Copy.
And at 9:11 Central Time, as Cygnus was flying over the eastern Pacific Ocean off the coast of Ecuador, we have release of the Cygnus spacecraft. The view you see here is of the latching end effector as the end effector and arm begin to back away from each other.
Proceeding to back away.
Concur, pin has exited the Lee.
Copy. Pin is exited the Lee.
NASA astronaut Kate Rubins continuing to monitor the spacecraft from the cupola of the International Space Station as back away of Cygnus continues.
Back away in progress.
Copy.
Everything continuing to proceed smoothly as Cygnus continues to back away from the space station. Cygnus is loaded with over 4,000 pounds of trash.
RMS to vehicle clearance, approximately 1.5 meters.
Houston copies 1.5 meters.
Continuing monitoring.
Copy. Station Houston on 2, back away complete.
The back away complete, and I concur more than 4.5 meters, proceeding with step 4.
Good copy.
And that was the voice of Capcom Norshi Nagai confirming that the back away of the Canadarm2 is now complete. This view of the Cygnus spacecraft now flying free over the eastern Pacific Ocean off the coast of Ecuador. It's flying 261 statute miles high.
Houston Station on Space Ground 2, Cygnus depart commanded.
Houston copies, Cygnus depart commanded. Cygnus departure burn is in progress. Monitor departure burn, step 5 in 1.602.
Copy step 5.
And as Cygnus is flying free, we have confirmation that the 3-minute departure burn is now underway. This departure burn will move Cygnus a safe distance away from the space station, eventually out of the approach ellipsoid. Once Cygnus exits the neighborhood of the space station, flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia will take over control of the spacecraft. This view of the Cygnus spacecraft showing it flying free after it was successfully undocked from the International Space Station at 9:11 Central Time while flying over the eastern Pacific Ocean off the coast of Ecuador. Everything proceeding nominally in the departure burn. Just less than 1 minute left remaining in the departure burn, everything continuing to proceed nominally. We just received confirmation that the departure burn is now complete, that burn continuing to move the spacecraft outside of the vicinity of the space station.
Station Houston on 2 for Kate. Cygnus departure burn complete. Perform step 6 in 1.602.
Step 6. Houston Station on Space to Ground 2, Step 6 is complete, and I can confirm that was a beautiful departure. We just want to say from the International Space Station, it's been a pleasure having the Cygnus vehicle on board. Congratulations to all of the NASA and the Northrop Grumman teams. We are looking forward to following your autonomous flight and the Sapphire experiment, and thank you for bringing us the incredible amount of science and supplies to the space station.
Station Houston on 2. Thank you, Kate, for the kind words. And Cygnus has exited the 200-meter keep-out sphere.
Copy on, Nemo. Thank you.
And we just heard words that Cygnus has now exited the keep-out sphere, that 200-meter gate or line around the space station. Once again, Cygnus was released from the Canadarm2 of the International Space Station at 9:11 Central Time this morning, as the space station was flying over the eastern Pacific Ocean off the coast of Ecuador. Following release, Cygnus conducted a 3-minute departure burn to move it safely away from the space station. Cygnus is now heading toward its final milestone of the day, the approach ellipsoid. Once Cygnus crosses the approach ellipsoid, the flight control teams in Dulles, Virginia, will take over full control of the spacecraft. If you're just tuning in with us today, the Cygnus cargo resupply vehicle successfully undocked from the International Space Station at 9:11 Central Time while flying over the eastern Pacific Ocean off the coast of Ecuador. Cygnus then completed a 3-minute departure burn, which allowed it to back further away from the space station. Cygnus then exited the keep-out sphere, which is a 200-meter gate or line around the space station. Cygnus is now heading toward its final milestone of the day, the approach ellipsoid. Once Cygnus crosses the approach ellipsoid, the flight control team in Dulles, Virginia, will take over full control of the spacecraft. Again, we had a successful undocking of the Cygnus cargo resupply vehicle from the International Space Station this morning at 9:11 Central Time.
Lab.
When Cygnus arrived to the space station on October 5th, it brought with it approximately 8,000 pounds of crew supplies, investigations, and equipment. Upon arrival at the International Space Station, the cargo was unloaded from Cygnus. For the 5th time, Cygnus hosted the Spacecraft Fire Experiment V, or Sapphire V experiment, to study the behavior of large-scale fires in microgravity. This experiment will be conducted upon the successful release of the Cygnus craft today, and once the vehicle departs the space station, before Cygnus makes its own fiery re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean on January 26th.
Sure thing.
A majority of the research done aboard the space station is centered around how the body adapts to the microgravity environment of space. For over 20 years, the International Space Station has served as a testbed and science laboratory and has been a critical stepping stone in our pursuit to send the first woman and next man to the moon by 2024 with the Artemis program. In a couple of minutes, we'll be looking for Cygnus to exit the approach ellipsoid, which is that 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 2 kilometer gate around the space station. This is the second major milestone for Cygnus today, having earlier exited the keep-out sphere. These invisible lines are also where we have checkpoints when vehicles approach the space station, helping flight controllers monitor vehicles when they are in the vicinity of the orbiting laboratory. We just heard confirmation that Cygnus is now officially out of the keep-out sphere. Today's release was monitored by NASA astronaut Kate Rubins from the cupola of the International Space Station. Also living aboard the space station are NASA astronauts Victor Glover, Shannon Walker, and Michael Hopkins, as well as Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Soichi Noguchi. They arrived on the SpaceX Crew Dragon vehicle following the launch of the NASA SpaceX Crew 1 mission on November 15th. They arrived at the orbiting laboratory 2 days later on November 17th. Also on station are 2 Russian cosmonauts, Sergei Ryzhikov and Sergei Kutsverkov, who arrived at the orbiting platform with NASA astronaut Kate Rubins aboard a Russian Soyuz vehicle on October 14th. Recapping some of the events from today, at 7:25 a.m. Central Time, flight controllers in Houston used the Canadarm2 to unbolt Cygnus from the Earth-facing side of the Unity module of the space station and maneuvered the vehicle to its release position. With NASA astronaut Kate Rubins monitoring its release, Cygnus was released at 9:11 Central Time as the space station flew over the eastern Pacific Ocean off the coast of Ecuador. Cygnus then conducted a 3-minute departure burn, eventually exiting the keep-out sphere about 200 meters away from the station. And the final milestone came just minutes ago as the spacecraft crossed over the approach ellipsoid. Joint operations have now ended as the Northrop Grumman team has full control of the spacecraft. Cygnus will conduct 2 secondary mission objectives related to the Sapphire V burn experiments and SharkSat demonstration before it deorbits on January 26th, having spent a total of 93 days berthed to the space station. Upon its re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean, over 4,000 pounds of trash will harmlessly burn up. With Cygnus now safely departed from the vicinity of the space station, that will wrap up our release coverage for today. Thanks for tuning in with us. This is Mission Control Houston.